Hello, and welcome to another episode of Just Keep Writing,
a podcast for writers.
By writers.
To keep you writing.
I'm Gabe.
I'm Shingai.
I'm Sameem.
LP.
And I'm Will.
And joining us today is Jenna Hanchey for this episode about executive dysfunction while writing. Jenna, would you please tell us about yourself?
Hi, everybody. I guess I should probably introduce myself by saying that I do actually write things, even though I'm going to spend the next hour talking with y'all about not writing things for the most part. But hi, I am mostly a flash fiction author. I have a lot of flash fiction stories published. And then I'm also an academic. So I write academic articles and white papers and reviews, predominantly of African and decolonial speculative fiction. And there's more, and it's of course slipping my mind because now I'm being recorded. I'm also a narrator for Simultaneous Times and Strange Horizons, and co-host along with Yvette Ndlovu and Chinelo Nwalu of the podcast Griots and Galaxies.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. It's lovely to have you here. Everyone is super excited. And so the topic for today is executive dysfunction. I mean, I'll just give a quick explanation for those who do not know the term. I mean, in broad terms, executive dysfunction is what we would call writer's block in general for the topic at hand. But Executive functions are the cognitive and mental abilities that help us engage in goal-directed actions. They direct actions, control behavior, and motivate us to achieve our goals and prepare for future events. People with executive dysfunction struggle to organize and regulate their behavior in ways that will help them accomplish long-term goals. And while executive dysfunction is the hallmark of ADHD, of depression, anxiety, and other disorders, everyone really suffers at some point or another from executive dysfunction. Although people with those disorders suffer, like the intensity is way higher and it happens more often. And as with many of these disorders and executive dysfunction in particular, it is deeply linked with emotions and emotion regulation. So usually what gives you this executive dysfunction is an emotion that is getting in the way, let's say. So for this, I will just jump into the questions.
I also just want to add for anyone who's listening that none of us are doctors. And that it's really important that if you feel like anything that we're talking about really describes what you're going through and you're concerned, is to reach out to a professional, a medical professional, a psychiatrist, to find out if maybe you have symptoms of ADHD or maybe depression. But I think Gabe has laid this out in the outline so beautifully and has such great questions. So I'm excited to talk. I just wanted to add that out. Sameem?
I'm just going to say technically Jenna is a doctor, just not of medicine. That's all.
Hashtag not that kind of doctor. But I do have a lot to say about anxiety.
Awesome. So go ahead, Gabe.
Okay, the first question is, I mean, it's sort of a two-parter. Firstly, what are the emotions that most heavily impact your ability to write for good and bad? Like, what are your bad emotions and what are the good emotions? So whoever wants to go first?
What are emotions is a part of this that I always think of. Like, what makes me want to write is hope. To create hope, emotion. Is hope an emotion? I think it's an emotion. I'm going to go with yes.
Run with it. Yep.
Hope is the emotion that makes me want to write. And what stops me from writing 9 times out of 10 is fear, but more complicated than that because words.
I think, okay, I'm going to lean into the whatever we want to be emotions are emotions, because I also got stuck a little bit on the emotions part. But if hope is an emotion, then the thing that keeps me from writing, I think, is feeling pressure or responsibility in a way where I'm feeling overwhelmed by things I've internalized that others might expect of me. So maybe expectations. or like internalizing that. And then the thing that unlocks it is flow. I don't know if that's an emotion, but something where it feels like there's an alignment between the thing that I am working on and the like political commitments and community commitments and kind of person that I want to be in the world. And that sort of alignment is what allows for me to write.
Mm-hmm.
Rage helps me write. I'm learning that's my default emotion for multiple reasons. What stops me, an emotion that stops me from writing, I've noticed is circumstantial, and one of that is money issues.
Mm-hmm.
Because it triggers something in me about the chaoticness of my childhood. And I've noticed that really stops everything for me. But rage. And I think rage can be a really good tool for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
righteous and justice formed actions.
Sameem?
Is curiosity an emotion? I don't know if it is. If it is, then that's
run with them.
Y'all are stealing all the good ones.
I think curiosity is probably the biggest thing that enables me to write, that pushes me to write. Just having questions about myself, the world, the people around me, and wanting to explore those questions in paper or screen. And I think it's what helps me through the despair of any given moment, maybe this particular moment in history, being able to take the pieces that I see and look for, use fiction to look for opportunity in them, in ways that things could turn out to be differently than the despair is leading me to think. And then I think that what blocks me is usually anxiety and internalized expectations of myself, similar to what Jenna was saying. But like, I read something super incredible and I love the way that the author did it. And I want to be able to do not that, but something that makes me feel that same sense of achievement that I feel for that author. And I can never, ever do that. Why should I do that? How would I think that I could do that? I'm terrible. I'm never going to be able to do it. That's my anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Shingai?
I feel like we should have Dochi's Anxiety as the theme song for this episode. I agree with everything that everyone has said. Like, as people were talking, I was thinking about moments where I have been moved into writing through flow, through hope, through rage. Rage is a big one. I agree with Will there. And through curiosity. Like, curiosity is a big part of my process. But I also think that for every time these feelings or emotions have made me want to write, there have been times that they have done the opposite. Like, sometimes I've been too angry at the world to feel like my writing is doing anything. Just hopeful for something else. I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, I wanted to just add on to that. Like you're talking about, Shingai, that rage can be something that propels, but it can also be something that just like overwhelms you to the point of not being able to write as well in that moment. I'm thinking about how grief can do the same thing for me. Grief is something that can really propel my writing, and it can also be something that is so overwhelming that it completely stops my language.
Along with spite and thinking about curiosity, something else that causes me to write is play. The opportunity to do something different, and sometimes it looks like doing something, writing a poem in my world to learn about my world. Sometimes it's especially when I feel like the world is too big for me to jump into. Like, I have to give myself these pressure valves that like give me like little toeholds before I start writing something bigger. Poems, little short stories in the world, just little bitty scenes. But that play has been really important lately.
Listening to you folks, all these emotions and all this and not just like moments of stress, moments of grief, do you try to push through those bad emotions? Do you try to use those emotions, or do you need to get out of them to be able to write, or all of the above?
This is a good question, Gabe. Really good. Because I think it really makes us think. And oh my gosh, LP has an answer. Big surprise. Go for it.
Why was it like that? I just raised my hand. Yeah, so my first art form in my life was music. And so I had a really hard time explaining to people that I processed my world, my emotions, my everything through music. I'm not there with writing yet. I'm getting there, but I think it can be really, but I know people who do and have. So I think that's valid. I'm super interested to honestly hear what Shingai has to say, because you were in a season of grief and wrote a lot out of a season of grief.
That's fair. Yeah. Now I'm also thinking about the seasons of grief that I've been in where I couldn't write a word. So I think it's worked both ways for me, for sure. And I think that with every season of writer's block that I've had, where I'm struggling with other hard emotions, I've needed to do something different. So for some seasons, I just need to give it time. I just need to like focus my attention elsewhere. I have to like, I don't know, just be creating in other modalities. And then in other seasons, I feel like the writing thing is the only thing that gets me through the grief or the other bad emotions. Will you have something to say?
I mean, yeah, I think with grief is not linear. I think grief is a lifelong process, because I think when grief comes from a place of like losing someone you love, you don't ever get over it. I think there's just different ways you can express that grief. And sometimes that grief is suffocating. I definitely could not write, or felt like I could write, for a really long time after I experienced a loss. And it was like I was drowning over and over again when I tried. And I thought that meant that like I didn't have the capacity to write, or I wasn't smart enough to write. So I internalized a lot of that guilt on multiple levels. But then I started to notice I could write when I was happy. And then the past 2 years, I wrote my play, which is dealing with that grief. And then since I've written it and finished it and had the workshop last summer, that grief is still sitting on my shoulder. But now it's like the floodgates have opened and I can really write. It's like processing that grief through art has opened these floodgates, and now I cannot stop writing. And I think if anyone is experiencing not being able to write because of grief, I would say be gentle with yourself. Don't blame yourself, and just move through it. Because sometimes the only way that we can actually handle our grief is to give ourselves grace and just, you're still a writer. Even if you haven't written, you're still an artist if you haven't drawn. It just means you're giving yourself the space to eventually create.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate both of your contributions, Will and Shingai, on this. I'm in a space right now where we lost one of the PhD students that I work closest with in the department here a couple weeks ago, just suddenly, just out of nowhere. And I have been completely unable to write, even to the point of being unable to journal, which is something I usually do every day in order to process my feelings and kind of align with where I want to be in the world. And over the past couple of weeks, what I found myself doing instead, there have been times where someone I care about will just read to me while I'm cutting pictures out of magazines and making, not even meaning or purposefully trying to create anything out of them, just seeing what happens, what I'm attracted to, what pieces end up coming together, and then noticing that I was cutting out of a lot of pictures of black holes or planets with shadows passing over them. And yeah, it was the sort of thing where I couldn't do anything until I made that piece of art. And then once I made that piece of art, I was able to make a few other collages, and bit by bit, I've started to be able to put words to things, but not that yet. But there's been other griefs where the first thing that needs to tumble out is the words. And I don't know why in some times for me, in some, like you put it, Shingai, seasons of grief, the words have come first and been the thing that is bursting out and needs to get released. And then in others, the words are just completely stopped until I can not process, because that doesn't seem right. Like you're saying, well, it doesn't go away. It's not something that is like finalized or processed. It's just continued, moved through, sat with in different ways. And some ways you need to sit with it in writing, and sometimes it's something else.
Go ahead, Sameem.
Yeah, now I'm just absorbing what everybody said. I think a lot of that resonated with me. I think the switching modes to different forms of creation when you feel like you still need to express something but without words has been helpful for me, especially doing things that are very tactile and like things that, and I don't know why crafts aren't considered art sometimes. I think I consider them art, but doing things that fall into the craft realm. So like that, definitely that all helps. But I think another thing that helps is switching writing modes. I think that a lot of times if I am working on something and then go through something personal that's challenging, I feel like it's too hard to concentrate on that piece, and therefore I can't work on anything else because I'm pressuring myself to finish that thing. And it takes some time to talk myself through the fact that it's okay to set that aside and try something different, whether it's other types of fiction, whether it's nonfiction, whether it's journaling or poetry. Just exploring other ways to use words has also been really helpful.
So I think one of the emotions that really struck with all of us was grief. But I think also, like, I've struggled with depression often, and a lot of it relates to that grief that I went through. But there was different signs to it. So I think what I've learned when I'm feeling depressed, and that means like I'm having a hard time just getting up and going about the day, I've really tried to focus on, LP mentioned this about play, to remember that I love writing, that it is play, and that I can let go of whatever expectations I have. I try to remember who I was when I was like 7, and I would make lists of X-Men teams. And then I would run around the house saying I was like usually one of the girl X-Men's because they were better. And I try to create from there. So I would say for everyone, try to remember the sense of play and fun when it comes to whatever your art is, whether it's writing or drawing or, acting out, anything. I think a sense of play when I'm depressed really helps me out.
Cool. I was just gonna ask you, Gabe, how you, like, what grief does for your writing and emotions in general.
Oh my. I've been focused on listening to you guys that I didn't even think of my own answers. But I mean, I resonate with everyone, even with the parts about money problems, which for the past few years, a combination of grief grief in my family, grief in the world, like since the pandemic times, and then with everything happening, like all that overwhelm while having money problems. I just, like, these past few years have been the hardest to be able to write, just like flat out, so hard to just even muster the energy to open my file has been so hard. And I mean, the next question that I was thinking, I'll jump with this, is that when you are in those times when, as Will was saying, you cannot even get out of bed, is there something that you found that has helped you, like, jumpstart that, at least get enough motivation to open your document? I don't know, like accountability partners, body doubling, any sort of brain hack. For example, for me, the thing that has helped me the most is my writing group, like by far. And no, not drugs, Will. Well, no, yeah, I take medication, so yeah, drugs. It helps a lot. So go ahead, Will.
My nephew is 6 now, and the biggest thing that would really help me is we went through this period where I would sing him to sleep via the phone. And of all songs that I would put him to bed would be Prince's Purple Rain. He loves Purple Rain. So again, it goes back to that sense of play and that little thing of me singing him to bed and just playing my guitar and having that moment with him on the phone or during the summer when I was in person was really a great way to kind of get me out of that moment, even if it's just a little. Kids, I think, have a really great way to draw the happiness out in you.
Go Shingai.
Okay, so my first answer is honestly to just give yourself a fuck ton of grace. Yeah, the world is and has been hard for the last few years. And I think already people have too much expectations on them watching a genocide and multiple versions of exploitation on the earth being committed in ways that are scary and cause us to be uncertain. And there's a pandemic and people have had personal losses within their community as well as the global political losses. And I think, yeah, now is the season to be giving ourselves more grace than ever. And the writing, because Will said, is a form of play, I think play requires grace. There's a dance with grace that is happening. Yeah, Jenna.
Yeah, as you're talking about these multiple scales from, watching and, being participants in the support of genocide by living in the United States, a country that is supporting and enabling that, and then personal griefs and personal tragedies, and then everything in between, and all these different scales of things that can be overwhelming sometimes. I was just thinking about how, sorry, this is a tangent, but it made me think about how I went to see No Other Land in theaters and was so destroyed.
I just saw that.
Yes, I was so destroyed by how those violences that are shown in this documentary of one small group of villages are already so unbearable. And then thinking about that in relation to the larger scale of things happening in Palestine writ large right now, and then globally, it can be so overwhelming just to look at all the multiplying violences. But play is one way out of that. And then something that has been very grounding for me is thinking about what I have the capacity for, what I have the gifts for, and what I have, what aligns with the ways that I want my writing to be in the world and the kinds of projects that I want to be working on now. And I always have up on my door, it's kind of silly maybe, but I have papers where each year I'll have a theme and write about where I'm rooting was last year and this year's is about wind and movement, but I will have all of the key words and I'll add to it throughout, like every day, just kind of like write a new word up there, scribble something up there. But the key kind of things that I want my writing and my life more generally to be oriented around. And then it gives me a good grounding space for like when I get overwhelmed by anxiety as well as violences and thinking about like, I have all of these different things that I feel like I need to be doing now. And I don't know where to start. That's what my executive dysfunction does. It's like, there's too many, it's too overwhelming. Where do I even begin? And so this gives me a place to begin. Like, here are the things that I have committed to. These are the things that I want to be working towards and putting my efforts into, and know that like they are fulfilling for me as well as like enabling for others. So if I can look at that and then think of all these projects then that I feel overwhelmed by, if these are not aligning with those, what the fuck am I even doing? Like, why am I doing that? Is it because I think I have to, or somebody else told me to, or I've internalized something? And if it doesn't align, then learning to get rid of it and focus on the things that like, this is what I want to be doing now, and that happens. Oh, I'm sorry, LP. Turning this political. My bad.
Everything is political.
Everything is political.
Yep.
I was going to say, there's no way you're not going to hear politics.
Oh, no. Yeah. I mean, I think if anyone who's listened to our podcast, we talk about a lot that political. Everything is political. So, and it's important we have discussions, even if we disagree with each other, because even though we tend to align in a lot of places, just is going to make us better people. We disagree. You know what? Jump in a river of hot lava tonight. Okay, go ahead, Shingai.
Is that going to be on the podcast?
It could be. Maybe. We'll see how Marshall edits it.
I just wanted to add something to Jenna. As you were talking, I was thinking about the film No Other Land, because I also watched it this week. And one of the things that really struck me about that film was what solidarity looks like. And I was coming away from it with a thought on solidarity as studying both the language and the culture of oppressed people, not from a voyeuristic lens, but from a lens of like trying to learn, like trying to ask what can I learn about being alive in the world and about resisting empire. And you do that on the day-to-day for African culture and speculative fiction. So yeah, I was just like connecting the dots with solidarity.
Thank you. That's what I'm hoping to do, but it's good to hear that it's reflecting back that way.
You also create a lot of spaces for African voices to be heard. Like with a podcast, with you create opportunities. Like the thing that you do is about sharing and redistributing resources, which I appreciate greatly.
That is actually something that I was excited to talk about at some point, but it doesn't have to do with this question necessarily. I'm just thinking about abundance economies and redistributing resources instead of hoarding. And I think there's something also that can get trigger anxieties or get people in executive dysfunction modes when they're when at least when I get too caught up in a like sort of having to do something or be something or have something, like achieve something, instead of moving the energy around and redistributing spaces or opportunities. Or I'm not making sense. I hope that the person who edits this cuts this out, but there's something about abundance economies that I think is important. I don't know how quite to get to it.
No, I think you're not. I think you are making sense, Jenna. I think it's really about, I think sometimes when we are overwhelmed, sometimes that overwhelmness can also come from a place of scarcity. And that's when we need to like, you know, maybe sometimes take a step back and be like, have a mind of abundance and redistribute and build community. And I think all of that is flowing into what you're saying. So we don't need to edit anything out. Sameem, then LP.
I mean, I think Will said exactly the things I was going to say, but I'll try to say them better because I have a scarcity mindset and need to compete. No, I'm just joking. No, I think that's basically it. Like, I think that there's a sense of bringing it back to the anxieties come from feeling like I'm not enough. How could I be enough? And realizing like I'm what I need to be. Just keep, like Jenna said, keep moving the energies around. So it totally makes sense.
I've been having this conversation in my Ghost Class group chat because we've been talking about Star Trek and how like what we see of Star Trek is this like militaristic, expansionist. We're exploring the world, but we're not seeking to conquer it. We're exploring the galaxy, but we're not seeking to conquer it. I'm like, okay, girl, whatever. But you keep annexing civilizations. It's fine. But what's interesting is that if you watch shows like Deep Space Nine, and I think you get a little of it with like Star Trek The Next Generation, because they were always going to Risa, which like in a lot of ways sounds like sexual tourism. But on Deep Space Nine, the captain's father owns a restaurant in New Orleans, and people transport from around the world to come to this place where he cooks. The thing is that, like, if you're a member of the Federation, there's no currency. So people come from around the world to eat his food, and he makes the food because he loves cooking, and he loves cooking for people. And they come and they eat it, and they consume it, and they want to do that. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, in the absence of capitalism, in the absence of needing to ensure that my material needs are met, what would I do with my time? And like, in those ways, it can feel like, all I have to do is find, this incredibly wealthy sugar daddy, or, get that $200,000 advance on, my 20 book deal. And like, maybe it'll happen. The hard thing is that like, when I think about Star Trek specifically, they can't imagine this utopia, where are the MacArthur Grant's child? Let's talk about it. They can't imagine this utopia without also imagining a reason to have a military. And so I think it's really up to us to spend some time thinking about what we would do in the absence of needing to fill those material needs, and our why about that, because I think it can get really muddy when you're balancing like, oh, well, I need to go to work, but I also want to write. And it was like, well, actually, maybe you need to write in order to making work make sense for you in your life.
Talking about being in the best headspace possible to be able to write, or pushing through when you're in a bad headspace, what are the things, like your basic self-care habits and practices, that you need to have covered to be able to write? Or at least, or the more you do those things, the more you will be able to write. Like, apart from monetary, which obviously when anyone's struggling with that, it's going to be super hard to write or impossible. So apart from drugs, Will, what are your self-care basics to be able to function? Sameem?
I mean, one thing that makes me really, really angry is how much sleep and exercise and eating well contribute to my artistic abilities. It's very upsetting when I realize things like that. So those like basic things don't solve all the problems, but they definitely make it easier if you can tackle those first. So one of the things I learned was stop trying to write the great thing when your back hurts. And it like hurts chronically and you need to figure out what's going on. And it's okay to pause and figure out what's going on first. And the writing will come. I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
Yep. Shingai?
Yeah, what Sameem said made me think that for me, And what I'm learning in this stage of my life is the necessity of listening to your body. Like you know, sometimes even with the like sadness things, sometimes it's like, am I sad or are my feet cold? Do I need to wear a sweater and like be cuddly and cozy with a hot cup of chocolate? And sometimes you're actually just sad because the world is shitty. But that said, I do think when I listen to my body, when I'm taking care of my very base physical needs, I'm more likely to have room for ideas, because if your back is hurting, like Sameem said, your brain is just giving you all the pain signals. So it's hard to make space in your brain for creative ideas. Also, being in writing community has been really helpful for me, because it forces me to be constantly thinking about stories, constantly analyzing stories out loud, sharing my opinions, and listening to other people's perspectives. And it also refines for me what I want to create, what I enjoy, what I don't enjoy, what I desire, and what I am repulsed by.
Go ahead, Jenna.
I was just going to add to the community, which I think is so important. Also, for me, that also takes the form of reading. If I'm not reading, I can't write. And sometimes I am on, for like at least my academic position, deadlines and things where I feel like, oh, I need to write something right now. But my idea, like none of us, well, okay, I can speak for myself. I don't believe that ideas are things that people have or create on their own, but come out of relationships. And I think that people are also only who we are through relationships. And so without that connection to community on one hand, and then also reading, like my ideas just don't come. They just kind of dry up and stop. And then sometimes I'll remember, oh, I just need to sit and like read novels for a week. And my brain will start worrying again in ways that it hadn't beforehand. So reading is also one for me.
Will?
I mean, money is like a really great thing because, you know, you live in a capitalist world, not worrying about money. Also, really great skincare products. Not gonna lie. I like to like put on a little facial mask while I write, so I get nice and hydrated. I would say, for me, as long as everything else is good.
Now, jumping off the things that help you write, or that you have to have covered, what are the things that you need to avoid to be able to write? For example, I mean, distractions, overstimulation. For me, the biggest thing sounds very simple, but if the first thing I do in my day is open my phone and scroll, I'm fucked for the day. I'm not going to be able to write. Like literally just opening with that extra dopamine at the start of the day will make it so I have way less motivation throughout the day. And I'm more likely to scroll again, to doom scroll, to distract myself. And those are, I mean, it sounds like a simple thing, but it's the biggest thing that I need to avoid in order to be able to write, to even just open my file, as I was saying. So what are those things, not just distractions, but anything you need to avoid to be able to? LP?
I'm an unmedicated ADHDer, and I was practicing it today. There was something going on my computer, and there was a TV on, and I was like, okay, do I need both of these on in order to be able to read this? Turned out I only needed one, but like frequently my writing takes place in coffee shops, not because I'm trying to look special or fancy. It's like, oh, look at me, I go and write in a coffee shop. But I really do need a level of something else going on where it makes sense. Lately that hasn't been working out as well. And like, I can't really write when my roommate's here because there's TV on and there's blah, 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 you know, talking. And so, but I'm starting to figure it out again, but I need a certain level of distraction in order to make me not distracted.
Sameem?
I mean, this sort of touches on your point about like opening up your phone and scrolling. And I think a lot of that is combated by trying to push myself to engage with longer form media. usually books is probably the main thing, where there's just my brain is willing to go deep, and if I can't go deep in reading, then I'm not going to be able to think deeply, and then my writing is going to reflect that. If I can even get a word out. Recently, I think I've started to appreciate jazz a lot more, for its form in ways that I hadn't. I mean, I've always liked jazz, but I haven't engaged with it as deeply as I am right now. And I think part of it is the depth and dynamism. Is that the right word? And I think there's like I love lots of different types of music that do similar things. But there's jazz makes me pay attention to pacing in a way that I kind of feel like it's similar to the pacing that you have to pay attention to in writing.
I guess it all ties back together to the anxiety stuff, but I think it's getting caught in what Shingai helped me figure out and pointed out to me once, the white supremacist sense of urgency. If you haven't read, is it Okun, I believe, who wrote, we can put a link, hopefully, about the different forms of white supremacy culture. And one of them is the sense of urgency of like, I need to get this thing done, and I need to get this thing done now. I need to be the one who does this. And I think that there can be a form of urgency in fiction writing and in storytelling, as well as in other forms of writing of, I don't know, particularly if you're invested in a certain politics of writing, in wanting to produce something and to be the one who produces it in a way that can take you out of community and make it harder to remember or to participate in writing, in art, in social change as a collective action. And so I think that can be something when I see myself start to put pressure on myself to take a back seat and think like, wait a second, what am I trying to do here and why? And do I need to? And what ways can I, take the pressure off and move towards play instead?
Yeah.
There's also the aspect that the publishing ecosphere is not well. And sometimes that can lead to communities of writers also not being well. We talked earlier about a scarcity mindset, and all of the creative industries prosper off the idea of scarcity. We already have our Black writer. We already have our Black horror. We already have this. We already have that. And you see that less, that doesn't, women are published more than men now, thank God. Queer writers are represented well, but like essentially everyone else is struggling in some way, shape, or form. And I'm a part of some writing communities that are very focused on publishing books as a means of like validation in a way that feels weird because, when I hear about my friends slow writing a book over, a year, 2, 3 decade, I'm like, okay, good. This is going to be the best book you can come up with. Do you ever notice that sometimes someone's first book is so much better than every book that follows? Partly because every book that follows was under contract. Every book that followed was under deadline. That ending didn't quite land. That's the struggle that we're dealing with in a lot of ways. And people want to be successful, and secretly everyone wants to be the one. It's like, oh, I'm the one. I got the book deal. It was $100 million contract. Like, let's get it. But I think even in our communities of writers, we have to be stringent in pursuit of a healthy atmosphere and a healthy attitude, and like throwing all this publishing push stuff at writers so that we can create freely instead of writing to a market. Because here's the thing. If you write a book to market and it doesn't sell, you've written this thing to market and it didn't sell. But if you write something that you're super proud of, it's exactly what you wanted it to be, and it doesn't sell, at least you did what the hell you wanted to do. And even if it doesn't sell the first time, girl, that next book might be the one, and this book will come back around. And I think that there's power in that. There's too much writing for this weird mainstream that I don't actually know exists.
LP made a really great point about, when people are under contract, sometimes they're not producing the right art. I wonder, and I guess it depends, and I'm not contracted, so I don't know, but I know myself enough I would hope that whatever agent you're working with and whatever editor you're working with, that when you tell them, I need more time, that they give it to you. And I see this in a lot of writers. Cameron Hurley comes to mind, actually. Her last book that came out was in 2017 with The Light Brigade, and it got really great reviews. And she was supposed to come out with another book a year later, and she hasn't yet. And she finally went to her editor and said, I need time. And her editor at Saga Press was wise enough, and maybe because, they have a relationship, and her agent especially said, then you need to take time. Then you need to take as long time as you need. And maybe not everyone has that luxury. I definitely think she probably has gotten a lot more grace because she's produced work before, but I would hope your agent and your publisher would try to foster that type of energy. Go ahead, Shingai.
I really appreciate that point, Will. And it makes me think also, as someone who doesn't currently have an agent or a publisher necessarily, that giving yourself time is also okay. And for me, to bring it back to Gabe's question, which is what you avoid, right? What you avoid to keep from writing. I don't know if I can actually say this because now I'm in the position of editor, but I'm going to say it anyway. I avoid paying too much attention to the industry, like too close attention to the industry, because I think that it does more harm to my psyche, my own personal relationship to my work than good, because I know if the publishing industry is like every other industry under capitalism, which it is, there's a lot of toxicity in people's relationship to product and people's relationship to creating, to art. So I think in order to maintain a relationship with my work where I know that I need time, I know that I need to give myself grace, I know that I need to be, like LP said earlier, something along the lines of, you want to be proud of the thing that you create, not because it sells, but because this is your heart that you're pouring out onto the page, So I avoid paying attention to who's selling, buying, producing what super quickly. Yeah.
One more thing on this, because I just remember Victoria Schwab was really burnt out, and a couple of her books didn't do well in the beginning. And then she wrote the Shades of Magic series. And she said what was so different about that, it was the first time she didn't care about market. She didn't care about anything. She literally felt her career was like pretty much done. And she said, I just needed a book for me. I just wanted to write what I wanted to write. And I think this all reinforces what, LP's talking about. Sometimes writing that book just for you is what's going to be the biggest hit. So I think it's, in a lot of ways, Shingai, good. You're not following the market, because sometimes you shouldn't, even as an editor. I think sometimes the way art works is we really don't know when something's going to blow up. We don't. A lot of it is consistently doing the work and being in love with the work, and then everything else is up to chance. And that is frustrating as an artist. I also want to just say that for some writers who are writing to market, sometimes they might be in a position where they have to, meaning that they are the breadwinner of their family. They do need just to do that IP or something. So, I think it all falls under the evils of capitalism. But there's no shade, I think, on any of our part if you have to write to market because of those reasons. I just hope you eventually just get to write the thing that you really, really want to write and love and are able to be successful.
So I'll drop the last question just to finish this episode. The usual question is what keeps you writing? But given the topic, I would like to ask you what keeps you wanting to write when you cannot write?
I have a backlog of ideas that I'm trying to get through.
Jenna?
Oh, how dare you? Let's see. What keeps me wanting to write? Conversations like this keep me wanting to write when I can't write. That's one thing I can say.
Okay. Anyone else?
Just wanting to write different ways I think the world could be is one of them. And through that, learning to or finding ways to engage with folks who have similar ideas or who've written towards similar things from different perspectives or different genres or even academic writing, who sort of I can find community with through that.
Will?
What was the question? What keeps me writing through even when I'm dysfunctional?
Basically,
what keeps you
yeah.
wanting to write?
What keeps you wanting to write?
Yeah.
Because I have rage built into me and I just need to release it through art. Truly. I need to get rid of this energy and transform it into something that people can read or look at or think about and hopefully escape a little bit. Shingai?
I think what keeps me wanting to write, on top of everything that y'all have said so eloquently, is that my work is always desiring to be in conversation with the world, the present and the past and the future. And I really enjoy a good conversation.
Okay, Gabe, what about you?
Damn you.
Mm-hmm.
This has changed many times. I've answered many times during the podcast, but I've realized lately, like literally, just so that I can be part of this community, just so that I can keep meeting more people. And that's what I've realized literally during like the last couple of weeks. That's what I love most about being a writer.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.